Hi there. So here we are in the seventh video in a series on working with fictional characters in dreams. And I mentioned in the last video that some of these fictional characters are actually archetypal. The Jungians have done a lot of work on this, and I've done some as well. And archetypal, of course, connects to mythology. So some of these fictional characters, if you know your mythology, they actually show up as myths as well. That's a longer conversation, and I've done whole classes on this. There's actually a myth class available at my website, shalquist.com, but as well as other classes that you can purchase as well. And I keep the prices down. I don't think people should have to pay enormous prices to get knowledge like that and practice. So the thing about fictional characters when they show up as in archetypal form is that they point at changes that are happening in the world, and which is why I sometimes refer to these as world dreams, and they're not really personal. So Carl Jung had a number of these dreams, and in fact, one of the things that got him interested in doing self-exploration was that in I think it was 1913, he was on a train ride, and he was kind of half asleep. I think he was reading and kind of dozed off, but he had a vision, an imaginative vision of floodwaters sweeping over Europe. And the same thing happened to him on the train ride back, and this time it wasn't floodwaters, it was blood. So he wondered about this, and he was concerned about it. Why are these disturbing images showing up in my dreams? And roughly a year later, when the First World War broke out, he had an aha moment that he apparently felt all through his body, and said, that's what that was pointing to. The war broke out in me first, in my own psyche, and then I saw it happen outside of me, right? So this is much more common than we frequently realize, and part of the fault of it is, of not recognizing it, is purely personalistic forms of psychology, especially the ones that only show interest in what can be measured and counted and quantified and evidence-based and all that. And they make no room for intuition. They make no room for how holistically joined to each other we are, how we're one species organismically, and any of that. So you have to go to depth psychology and its kindred aspects of deep psychologies, organismic psychologies, to get that kind of information. It's not mainstream. Don't know when or if it ever will be. But it's also not highly mystical or metaphysical. It just happens to people all the time. So when I was practicing as a therapist, sometimes people would come in and they'd say, I have a secret that I haven't told anybody. And it was almost never anything like sexual or criminal or anything like that. It was I had a dream, and then a week later it happened, right? I had a dream about a flood, and then a few days later a flood broke out over here, area I'm familiar with. Or I dreamed that a war broke out, and then one did. This is really actually fairly common. And I won't go into all the reasons why, but sometimes our fictional characters in dreams bring those kinds of heralds of changes in collective consciousness. So I look forward to the day when depth psychology won't go mainstream, I don't think, but at least some of it can, some of its findings. And I look forward to the day when everybody realizes that this happens all the time. So that's another way of thinking about fictional characters who show up, especially in dreams, that sometimes they're announcing things that are going on in the collective. And that's why when you read fantasy, science fiction, other forms of fiction, you will often see something in a novel that actually happens later in the outer world, and people will go, wow, that author really saw in advance. And in a sense they did, but more specifically, their imaginal characters saw it in advance and told the author, right? So we'll have to see if that happens with my novel at all, with Soul Mapper, if there's anything in there that will actually take place down the road a little bit. The big hope that I have that will take place, that I hope will take place, is that we build a world community from the roots up, not the top down, that's dedicated to inclusiveness, diversity, peace, and just plain delight in living on this planet. which I call Terrania, hence the name Assembling Terrania that I use for the cycle of stories. So that I do hope happens. So in the next video, which will be number 8, let's talk a little bit about actual practice with these, working with these figures.